بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على عبد الله ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. During the week since our last lesson, I received an email from one of the attendees of the class who said that they were very confused over our last lesson regarding the wiping over the socks. And they said that what I said in the lesson seemed to oppose everything that they had been told about the permissibility of wiping over the cotton socks, and it was something quite confusing. So I wanted to clarify certain issues. Now, first of all, I wanted to say that I want to be really clear that in this class, we take a slightly more academic approach than normal. And what that means is sometimes we will explain the reason behind things, we will explain some of the differences between scholars, we will explain some of the reason for those differences. It's not one of those classes where we just sit there and say, you should do this, and that's it. It's a class where we study the reason why some scholars said this, the reason why some scholars said that, and we don't go into it loads. I don't like burden you with too much of the science of hadith or too much fiqh or too much usul, but I also try to make the class something more than just, this is my opinion about what's right, now go and do it. You know, something more detailed than that, something a bit more academic and a bit more, perhaps the word is scholarly, or a bit more appropriate for someone who's formally studying than just telling you necessarily the right thing to do. And sometimes that can lead to confusion. I'll be the first to admit that sometimes if people feel it's a bit heavy, they can get a little bit confused. So let's first of all cover three different types of, if we can say, footwear or socks. Three different types of socks and the ruling of each. So the first is the khuf, and the khuf are the leather socks, primarily. Again, if we go into all of the ikhtilaf, and we start talking about the ikhtilaf about whether the khuf has to be from leather or not, we're going to get confusing. But let's just start with leather socks. Leather socks and wiping over them is a matter of consensus among Ahlul Sunnah, to the point that it became mentioned in the books of Aqidah, and nobody opposed it. It is said nobody opposed wiping over the socks except for a mubtadi', except for an innovator. I.e., this is the leather socks. And some of the scholars, very limited number of the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah, in the early days had some confusion over this, such as mentioned from Abu Hanifa rahimahullah and others, but generally there is a consensus from the scholars of the Sunnah regarding wiping over the leather socks. So we can put that on the side. Everyone happy that wiping over the leather socks is a matter of so much agreement that it became mentioned in the books of Aqidah, that the one who doesn't agree to wiping over the leather socks is either Khariji or Rafidi, or is either from the Khawarij or the Rafida or some other deviant group, and that all of Ahlul Sunnah wiped over the leather socks. That's one issue. The next issue is socks that are made from a different material which share the same characteristics exactly as leather socks. For example, if the socks were made out of synthetic leather, okay, so they're not made out of real leather, but they share every characteristic with leather socks. They look the same, they hold water, they're like a shoe, you can walk on them, they're difficult to take off, and all of the other elements of leather socks. Many of the scholars said these are still called a khuf in Arabic. Even though the material is not leather, they are still called a khuf if they are made from that which is identical to the characteristics of leather. And even if they're not called a khuf, then we can say that there is agreement that it is permissible to wipe over them, even if they are not made from leather, as long as they have the characteristics of leather. So there's two types out of the way. Now we come to what is called the jawrab. And the jawrab is a sock made of material like wool or cotton or nylon or something similar. So we have the khuf, and the khuf is either made of leather or something which is identical to leather in properties. In terms of it holds water, you don't get, water doesn't go through it, you can walk on it for a long time, it covers your whole foot, it's hard to take off, and all of the other things that the scholars say about the khuf, put that on the side. Now we come to talk about the jawrab. And I'm going to read you some of the statements of the ulama with regard to the jawrab. And the jawrab, remember, are the socks that are made from wool or cotton or nylon or something similar. Imam Daqiq al-Eid, rahimahullah ta'ala, said the scholars of the Sharia have supported wiping over the khuf to such a degree that it has become one of the symbols of Ahlul Sunnah, and rejecting it has become one of the symbols of Ahlul Bid'ah. This is regarding the khuf. Ishaq al-Rahawayh, rahimahullah ta'ala, said, it was the sunnah of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and those who were after them among the tabi'een to wipe over the socks, and there was no difference among them over it. So they're talking here about now the jawrab, over wiping over the jawrab. And Ibn al-Munzir said the permissibility of wiping over them is reported from 9 of the companions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam: Ali ibn Abi Talib, Ammar ibn Yasar, and Abu Mas'ud, and Anas ibn Malik, and Ibn Umar, and Al-Bara ibn Azib, and Bilal and Abu Umama, and Sahal ibn Sa'ad. And Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala, quoted him and added 4 more, saying 13 of the Sahaba established the permissibility of wiping over the woolen socks. So are we all now happy that you can wipe over woolen socks? Good. One problem remains. When we talk about them wiping over woolen socks, we can pretty much agree that the nylon socks that we have today did not exist in their time. And there was nothing similar to them in their time. The socks were thick, they were similar to the khuf in terms of their thickness, you could walk on them for a long time, and they were, like you've seen how socks were made before they had the Industrial Revolution. Well, these are hand knitted, made out of wool or cotton, and they are thick, they cover the whole foot. And so some of the scholars came along, and in fact the majority of the scholars came along, and they said that what is meant by the cotton socks are those which are thick. They are basically impermeable. Water doesn't really go through them because they're very, very thick. You can walk on them, they're hard to take off, and all of the rest. That is where the strongest amount of disagreement lies. In the first 3 issues, there is very limited disagreement. Leather socks, synthetic leather, and thick woolen socks that take on most of the characteristics of leather socks. The problem comes, or the real debate for the most part, comes when we talk about thin nylon socks like what we have today. Because many of the scholars came and said, well, to be honest, they're not similar to the jawrab that the companions wiped over, or the tabi'een wiped over, or the generations after them wiped over, because they were wiping over thick woolen socks. And you're talking about wiping over thin nylon socks. At this point, the scholars differed once again. I'm simplifying this, but as we hear all the time, within each statement there is more differences of opinion. But we come to this issue of thin nylon socks. And by thin, I don't mean you can see your foot through them, but I mean they are thin cotton or nylon socks. That they are basically the socks that most people wear today. They are, very, less than maybe, 3 millimeters or 4 millimeters thick. They're very thin nylon or cotton socks. Those, the scholars differed over them. Some of them said that you can't say not to wipe over them because they're still called a jawrab in Arabic. And you don't have any dalil that the socks the Sahaba wore were all of a certain thickness. Nobody measured the thickness of their socks. And the fact that they used to wipe over what is called jawrab, and you're wearing what is called jawrab, then there is no issue here. That's a jawrab, And that's a jawrab, they used to wipe over them. It doesn't matter that yours are thinner than theirs. And this was the opinion of Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, and he reported it from Umar and from Ali radiallahu anhuma. And he mentioned it from Abu Yusuf and Muhammad from the Hanafis, and from Ishaq, Ishaq ibn Rahaway, and Dawood, Dawood al-Dha'i. They mentioned that these scholars of Islam, these two companions and these scholars, did not make any distinction regarding the thickness of the socks. And the fact that they are called a jawrab means that they are a jawrab. A sock is a sock. You wipe over it, doesn't matter how thick it is. And they said that the reason for wiping over the socks is because they cover the foot. And anything which covers the foot is suitable to wipe over regardless of how thick or how thin it is. Shaykh Ibn rahimahullah ta'ala was asked about this. He said, this opinion that it is permissible to wipe over everything that is worn on the foot, i.e. thick or thin, is the correct opinion. This is because the text that mentioned wiping over the khuf are unrestricted without any limiting conditions. And whatever the legislator mentions in an unrestricted way, it is not allowed to make conditions for it. Because making conditions for it would restrict what Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam left expansive. And our basic principle is we do not restrict these things. And the universal principle is that of generality, unless there is an evidence to restrict or specify it. Some of the companions of Ash-Shafi'i, and I think by this he means An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, mentioned the permissibility of wiping over the thin socks from Umar and from Ali radiallahu anhuma, and this supports the opinion that it is permissible to perform wiping over thin socks. This is the opinion of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen. Why did I hesitate to bring this opinion to you? Because the overwhelming majority of the scholars are against it. And I wanted to make that clear. I wanted to explain to you from an academic point of view, besides what you actually do, that the majority of the scholars hold that it is not permissible to wipe over thin socks. And that the condition of a jawrab is that it has to have a certain degree of similarity to a khuf. Meaning it has to be thick, or you have to be able to walk on it, or water doesn't go through it, or one of these things we've talked about many times. However, this number of people, and if it is authentic from Umar and from Ali radiallahu anhu, then this is a strong evidence, bearing in mind, of course, that the opinion of one companion or two is not a conclusive evidence, but it's a strong evidence, no doubt. And likewise, from a linguistic point of view, if you have 13 of the companions wiping over socks, then there's nothing to limit what those socks are. But I want to give you the counter-argument so that you understand that this is not just, the scholars don't speak from desire. This is not just, like somebody wants to oppose the sunnah, so he says you're not allowed to do it. From the strongest of the people against this opinion in our time is our Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, Hafidhullah ta'ala. And he is staunchly of the opinion that it is impermissible to wipe over thin socks. And his argument against this argument that Shaykh Uthaymeen brings is that the legislator has restricted wiping. And the restriction in wiping is restricting it over to that which has an analogy with a khuf. I.e. that which is reported from the Prophet ﷺ is wiping over the khuf. And not wiping over anything else. That which is reported from him is wiping over the khuf. And wiping over the jawrab from the companions, from that which we know from it, is that these were socks that were similar in characteristics to the khuf. You could still apply the word khuf in the sense that they had all of the attributes of the khuf. And he mentions from this is the fact the Prophet ﷺ mentioned regarding the khuf, that if you don't find sandals for Hajj, then you can wear a khuf. So he said that there's no way that you can say that the Sharia expands to thin socks when the Sharia limits every single text to the khuf or to the jawrab, which was known to have a similar characteristic to it. So the point is in this, not to confuse everybody. If you want my personal opinion, I agree with the opinion of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen that you can wipe over these thin socks. And my secondary evidence for this is that the key reason for this rukhsa The key reason for this permissibility is to make it easy when it was extremely difficult. Removing the khuf is extremely difficult and it's extremely cumbersome and it's a lot of hardship. So the shari', the legislator, made it easy for the people by allowing them to wipe over them because they cover the foot. The reality is this same illah, this same reason is present in the thin socks. Removing them is a huge hardship for people today who are at work, for people who have to make wudu in sinks where there is not a low sink, for places where they're not allowed to put their foot in the sink. It's a huge hardship for them to wipe over to remove their socks and wash their feet. And so we say the hardship is there, and the principle is al-mashaqqa tajlib al-taysir. Hardship brings about ease. And this principle here is there for us. The companions wiped over the socks. There is no evidence that there was a certain thickness to them. And at the end of the day, the opinion of Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, of An-Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, of some of the scholars of the Hanafiya like Muhammad ibn al-Hasan and Abu Yusuf, this is a strong enough evidence for us that wiping over the socks is permissible. But I wanted to make it clear to you that this is not the opinion of the majority, so that one of you takes this issue seriously and you don't just enter into something just because you heard that this is what the people of the Sunnah do. And the people who follow the Salaf al-Salih, they wipe over their thin socks. This is an oversimplification. And don't reduce the ikhtilaf between the ulama to something that our scholar said and your scholar said. And Ibn al-Qayyim mentions this in his Nullification, that the two worst things that a person can combine are al-jahl al-murakkab and ta'assub. That a person joins compound ignorance. What is compound ignorance? When you don't even know that you're ignorant. You don't even know that there's another opinion. You don't realize that you're ignorant. We call this jahl al-murakkab, compound ignorance. And then on top of that, you're muta'assib. Not only do you not know that you're ignorant, but you're extremely muta'assib to one opinion. And this is my opinion, and it's like a football team or a cricket team. I support it, and there's no other opinion, and there's no other qawl, and everyone else is jahil except me. This is the reason why I explained wiping over the socks like I did. Because I want you to develop a respect for the majority of the ulama of Islam who said that it is not permissible. And why they said that it is not permissible. And that this opinion is not hawa, it's not desires, it's not picked from thin air. They had a sensible, reasonable basis for making this opinion. Then after that, we can say this opinion is marjuh. It's less correct than the other opinion, or it's not the correct opinion, and the correct opinion is wiping over the cotton socks, no problem. But don't be guilty of these two things that Ibn al-Qayyim said. Jahlul murakkab and a ta'assub. That you have this compound ignorance, that you don't know that there are other opinions, and then on top of that, you're fanatical towards your own opinion. Be aware that the majority of the scholars of Islam did not hold it was permissible to wipe over the thin socks. So be careful about it, think carefully about it, research the dalil, make sure that you are happy with what you are doing. But I don't feel it's an amana for me just to say to you, yeah, wipe over them inshallah, that's. And then 200 people come to me on Qiyamah and say, you told me this and you didn't tell me that this opinion is a minority opinion held by a small number of scholars in Islam. And I wiped over my socks every time in my prayer, and this happened and that happened. We take it seriously. And Shaykh Fawzani has a statement on this which I really respect. And he said, not every statement of the scholars is to be spread around to the people. Not every ikhtilaf is to be told out to the people, and not every statement of the scholars is to be shared to the people. We have a principle in Islam about sticking to that which is the safer and the stronger opinion. Now, I look at this dalil and this is enough for me. I'm happy with this. But I feel that from the amana is to tell you guys that this is a minority opinion. I think that is part of the amana of a teacher who is teaching something, that you tell people that the majority of the scholars of Islam did not hold this opinion. Now the majority doesn't matter anything to us, the majority doesn't have any meaning, but it's something to convey to you only. The truth can be with one person and there can be a million people on the other side. But you understand that both of them had a dalil, and you understand what their dalil is. And now I've read you the other side, I've read you the opinion of Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah that it is permissible and the reason why he said so. And the statement of Ishaq ibn Rahawayh and Al-Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, and that this is reported from Umar and Ali radiallahu anhuma, that it doesn't matter how thick the socks are. Having said that, we haven't finished yet, because that group differed into two groups. And the majority of that group said they have to be thick enough that they cover the foot. They have to be thick enough to cover the foot. So if you get really, really thin socks where you can see the color of your skin underneath, then I don't recommend you wipe over them. Because now you are getting into like the minority of the minority of the minority. You're getting into the very rare opinion. Whereas even this group, the majority of them said that there is a limit to how thin they can be. They should at least be thick enough to cover the foot. And there's a lot to talk about this. There's a lot of ikhtilaf about the differences and similarities between them. And I think that's something that it is worth us to consider while we are thinking about this at least. So I hope that has clarified what I meant last lesson and why I said what I said. So I said that if you're talking about leather socks, there's no ikhtilaf. If you're talking about synthetic leather, there's almost no ikhtilaf. If you're talking about thick cotton socks, then this is clearly, there's a clear, strong evidence for this. If you're talking about thin socks, then I think that the opinion of Imam al-Nawawi is a strong opinion. But at the same time, you should understand that it wasn't the opinion of most of the scholars in the madahib. And so you're aware of that at least. You go into that with your eyes open. You understand where this opinion comes from and why each one said what they said. And again, this is a balance, and I know I'm taking time from the lesson, but I do want to talk to you about this. This is a balance. We should always have a balance. You see people on two sides. On one side, you see people who are muta'assib to their scholar or their madhab or their imam, and they don't care whether it opposes the sunnah or it matches the sunnah, and that is clearly blameworthy. But you also see some people who disregard the statements of the scholars and say, leave us from the statements of these men. They didn't know sunnah, nor did they know Quran. We know sunnah, we know what the sunnah is. And that's also not true. Rather, you have to have a middle way. You have to have a respect for the scholars in Islam and for their opinions and for their ijtihad, the fact that they are rewarded for the ijtihad that they make. At the same time, you have to search for the truth. What matters is not what the majority said, what matters is the truth and the evidence for that truth. So it's important that you find a balance in that. Don't end up being from those people who think that following the sunnah means abandoning the scholars and taking Sahih al-Bukhari and just this is my guide from now on, and I don't have any scholars who explain anything to me. Because this is not the sunnah. And this opposes the sunnah and opposes the way of the pious predecessors and how they approach knowledge. At the same time, this blind, obsessive following of one opinion and disregard for the dalil is even further away from the sunnah than the first example. So don't be from these people and don't be from these people. Be from the people who follow the evidence, who follow the sunnah, and who understand and respect the scholars of Islam from Ahlul Sunnah and their different opinions, and respect the scholars of fiqh and their ijtihad, while putting their emphasis and their focus upon the dalil. Because everyone, like Imam Malik and others said, كُلٌّ يُؤْخَذْ مِنْ قَوْلِهِ وَيُرَدْ. Everyone, he has his opinion accepted or rejected. And people, you can get something I can say can be true, something I can say can be wrong. Except the Prophet ﷺ. This is the one who none of his opinions are rejected. As for everybody else, we get things right, we get things wrong. But respect for the people of knowledge is something that was practiced by the Sahaba and by the Tabi'een and by the generations that came after them. Love for the scholars, respect for the scholars. Look at the way that in the hadith in Sahih Muslim, with regard to the hadith of Jabir ibn Abdullah, in this description of the Hajj of the Prophet ﷺ in the middle of this hadith, in the beginning of this hadith. And if you just go to this hadith and read through how the beginning, how it starts, and you see the respect that the Sahaba and the Tabi'een had for the Sahaba, and they had for one another, the love that they had for one another, and the respect they had for the people of knowledge. And it's important that we don't lose that, and we understand that there are differences of opinion, and we understand that those differences of opinion didn't come from desires. They came from ijtihad that was either right or wrong. At the same time, we do not say that both of them are right. You know, when you have two differences of opinion, this is right and this is right. Clearly one of them is right and one of them is wrong. But that doesn't mean that you can't have respect for a scholar of the Sunnah who holds an opinion that is different to your opinion. Okay, here ends the lecture. Not the lecture, but the first lecture. And we come to our hadith for the day. We're probably only going to cover one, inshallah ta'ala, but I think that needed to be said. We've come to a new chapter, and our new chapter is Babu Nawaqid al-Wudu. Babu Nawaqid al-Wudu. Nawaqid is the plural of naqid. And what this basically means is mubtilat and wudu, the things which break the wudu and cause the wudu to become invalid. So after the author mentioned how to make wudu, and he mentioned wiping over the socks and wiping over the turban and all of these other kind of supplementary issues, he now comes to the next logical progression, rahimahullah ta'ala, which is what breaks your wudu. You've made wudu, so what causes you to leave the state of wudu? And the first hadith, عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه أنه قال كان أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم على عهده ينتظرون العشاء حتى تخفق رؤوسهم ثم يصلون ولا يتوضؤون. أخرجه أبو داود وصححه الدارقطني وأصله في مسلم. From the hadith of Anas ibn Malik رضي الله عنه, that he said that the companions of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam during his time, there are 2 points we need to understand from this. The first is we should be aware and remind ourselves who is a companion. A companion is the one who met the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, believing in him and died as a Muslim. So there are 3 fundamental pillars to a person being from the companions of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The first is that he should have met the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by met we mean being in his presence, even if that means he saw him from a distance, or if he was blind and he was brought into the presence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We can't say whoever saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the blind are also from the Sahaba. And by meeting, we don't mean that they had to shake his hand or that they had to hear him say something, but that they were in his presence, such that they could see him or hear him or sense him in some way. They were in his presence. And at the time they met him and were in his presence, they were believers in him. So who does this exclude? This excludes the munafiqun, who met him but were not believers in him. It excludes the non-Muslims who were among the people of Quraysh, like Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab, who met him but were not believers in him. And of course they must have met him while during his life. And that excludes those who say they saw him, for example, in a dream. This does not count. So they have to have met him during his life. They have to have met him either by seeing him or by being in his presence. And it's not necessary that they shook his hand, it's not necessary that they were, right next to him, but they should have been in his presence in general. And while that happened, they must have been believers in him, and they must have died in Islam. And by dying in Islam, we remove those people who were murtad. They were apostates, they were Muslims, they believed in him, and then they left Islam, and they died as non-Muslims, as happened to some of the tribes. So in this case, you have this example of those people who left Islam and they are not from the companions. The companions are those people who met the Prophet ﷺ, believing in him and died as Muslims. And they said that the companions of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, ala ahdihi, during his time. This is a very important principle because this principle gives an understanding that what is to follow is a sunnah taqreeriyah. The sunnah is made up of, I'll say to you 4 things, and you can say 5 things, and you can say 3 things, but I'll give you the middle one and say 4 things. The sunnah is made up of ما أضيف إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من قول أو فعل أو تقرير أو صفة. And some of the scholars said أو صفة خلقية أو خلقية. So the sunnah is made up of 4 primary things. من قول, what the Prophet ﷺ said. أو فعل, what the Prophet ﷺ did. So he didn't say something, but he did something. أو تقرير, or what he approved of. أو صفة, or a description of him. Some of the scholars don't mention the description, they include that in the other things, and some of them say صفة خلقية وخلقية, a description of his manners and a description of his physical person. But the upshot of it all is that these 4 things make up the sunnah. That which is attributed to the Prophet ﷺ from the things that he said, and the things that he did, and the things that he approved of, and the things that he was described with. So can anyone give me an example of something the Prophet ﷺ said that we studied in Bulugh Maram? Just in English will do. What's the first hadith that we did?
Seawater.
The seawater.
Purified.
وَالطَّهُورُ مَاؤُهُ الْحِلُّ مَيْتَةٌ. It is the one whose water is purifying and its dead is halal. This is something the Prophet ﷺ said. Okay? What about something the Prophet ﷺ did?
Made wudu from the well.
Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ made wudu from the well of Bulugh. Very good. So he made wudu from the well of Bulugh. From this also is the wudu of Uthman radiallahu anhu, because when Uthman did the wudu, he said, this is how I saw the Prophet ﷺ making wudu. So also the wudu of Uthman, when he described the wudu, he said, this that I'm showing you is what I saw the Prophet ﷺ do. So these are some examples of things that he did. This here is an example of at-taqreer, approval. And what do we mean by approval? We mean one of 2 things. Either the Prophet ﷺ verbally or out of his actions showed his approval. So for example, he laughed, or he smiled, or he said, you have done the right thing, or something along those lines. This is one way of approval. But there is something unique only to the Prophet ﷺ, and this is approval through silence. This is generally unique. There are some limited cases where we can approve things through silence, but in general, the Prophet ﷺ, every time he remains silent about something that is done in his presence, this is considered approval. Why do we consider this to be approval? Because it is not possible that something haram could be done in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ and then he not say anything or Allah not inform him about it. So you understand that if one of the companions does something in his presence, and we're not talking about a one-off that maybe nobody notices, we're talking about something that is done openly in his presence, like here, ala ahdihi, in his, all the time, during the time he was with us, we would do this. We would do this particular thing. During the time that he, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, was with us. It's not conceivable that they could be doing this particular thing, and then the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam allows them to pray without wudu, and allows them to do something haram, and neither he says anything nor does Allah Azza wa Jal send down any revelation. This is mustahil, this is impossible. Rather, if the Prophet ﷺ was silent about it, that means that it was permissible to do. All that has to be established is that it was done in his presence, or it was common knowledge during his time, if that makes sense. It was either done in front of him, or it was commonly done during his time. So, you sort of see things where the companions did something and the Prophet ﷺ pulled them up on it. For example, the hadith about rolling around in the dust instead of, when there's no water for ghusl and things like that. You have examples where the Prophet ﷺ said, don't do this, do this. But for something to be done by the companions, during his time and time again, in his presence, and then he doesn't say anything about it, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, this is an evidence that this particular action is from the sunnah of approval, i.e. it is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ by his approval of it. What is this particular sunnah? That they would say, يَنْتَظِرُونَ الْعِشَاءِ, they would wait for the Isha. And this has a number of benefits in it, waiting for the Isha. First of all, the recommendation of delaying the Isha prayer. The Prophet ﷺ used to love to delay the Isha prayer and to pray it later than its earliest time. However, because of the hardship for the companions and for the Ummah, Isha was allowed to be prayed at its earlier time. Otherwise, the Prophet ﷺ used to love to delay the Salat of Isha. And from this is that it is an obligation to wait for the Imam. And this is something, alhamdulillah, we don't really have it here. I've not seen it in Dubai. But in the UK, this is a big musibah we have. That if the Imam is 30 seconds late, everyone will stand up and push anybody forward. And this is haram. It is haram by the statement of the Prophet ﷺ and by the action of the Prophet ﷺ, that it is haram for the congregation to push someone forward to lead the salah unless two things happen. Either the Imam, who is the Imam Ratib, who is the regular Imam, tells you that he's not coming, or it's clear that he's not coming. For example, if he doesn't come within 10 minutes, he's not coming. Or he personally appoints someone to lead the salah. So either the Imam comes and says, if I'm not here in 5 minutes, the mu'adhin can lead the salah. Or it becomes clear that he's not coming. They wait 10 minutes, 15 minutes, he's not there, it becomes clear that he's not coming. In this case, the most knowledgeable of them in Quran can lead them in the prayer. But as for the people waiting 30 seconds and the people from Awqaf goes off and then everyone stands up and pushes someone forward, this is haram. This is forbidden. Unless it is clear that the Imam is not coming at this time. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited this when there is Imam Ratib, when there is a regular Imam. As for a Musalla, where there is no regular Imam, then this does not apply, because there is nobody to wait for. There is no regular Imam. But a masjid where there is a regular Imam, you can only step forward to lead the prayer if one of two things happens. Either you are appointed by the Imam, like the Mu'adhin, or if I don't come, the Mu'adhin will lead the Salah. Or it becomes clear that the Imam is not coming. Otherwise, it is an obligation for you to wait for the Imam. So the Sahaba used to wait for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They used to يَنْتَظِرُونَ الْعِشَاءِ until their heads would, perhaps the word is tilt, or that their heads would, they would doze off. That is the meaning of it. Their heads would, tilt, and they would start to doze. They would start to doze. Then they would pray without making wudu. And this is narrated by Abu Dawud, declared Sahih by Darqutni. And the original story, or the original, without this detail here, the full story of the original story is in Sahih Muslim. So we said that we have to wait for the Imam. And this hadith indicates to us that they did not used to make wudu if they were snoozing. Now there are many narrations with regard to this hadith. Some of them mention that they would snore. snoring was coming from them, then they would stand up and make wudu. Some of them mentioned that some of them would lie down. Some of them said that they would sleep sitting, that their heads would tilt as they were going to sleep. And many sort of different descriptions of how they would sleep. And in this regard, the scholars had lots of opinions, but we can summarize them into three. We can kind of sort of filter all of these opinions into three basic opinions. The first one, that sleep does not break the wudu in any case. Sleep does not break the wudu under any circumstances. This is the first opinion. They said, if you go to sleep for all night, unless you know that you broke your wudu, you don't break your wudu. This is the first opinion. What is their evidence? Their evidence is this hadith. They said the companions used to snore, they used to lie down, they used to be, knocked out, and they would stand up and pray. And they did not used to make wudu, and this was done with the full knowledge of the Prophet ﷺ who allowed them to do it. The second opinion is the opposite. It breaks in all cases. So they said, if you close your eyes for a second sitting up, your wudu is broken. What is their evidence? Their evidence is the hadith of Safwan ibn Assal radiyallahu ta'ala an, that we mentioned previously, except because of defecating or urinating or sleeping. And so they said that this regarding the wiping over the hoof is a clear evidence that sleep breaks the wudu, because the Prophet ﷺ said it is allowed to wipe, the meaning of which is you can wipe over your hoof when you go after you've woken up from sleep. So they said that this is an evidence that sleeping breaks the wudu in all circumstances. But we say to them, okay, how do you answer this hadith? Because this hadith, the companions are dozing off to sleep, snoring, lying down, and then getting up and praying. How do you answer this hadith? They said, there is no evidence that the Prophet ﷺ knew about this. This is the action of some companions, and it is not a consensus of the companions, and the action of some companions is not a hujjah, is not a proof in Islam. This for me is a very weak opinion. This is the weakest of the three opinions. Because in reality, it is not possible to imagine a circumstance where the Prophet ﷺ would allow these people to pray without wudu and then not tell them to repeat the prayer. That is something that is extremely difficult to imagine, and it's such a long shot, to say that, you have this hadith of Safwan, and then to give that preference over this hadith, and to say that, it's not clear that this was his approval, and maybe he didn't know about it. This is a very weak statement. The third is that we differentiate between two different types of sleep. Again, there are lots of opinions within this. Some said if you're sitting, some said if you are lightly sleeping. But the summary of it all is, if your sleep is light enough that you are not totally knocked out, and you have some sort of awareness of what is going on around you, then your wudu does not break. And if you are completely, out of it, then your wudu breaks. That is the basic differentiation that the scholars make between the two. Now I must point out that is an oversimplification. There are some of them who say you have to be sitting, some of them who say you can sit but as long as you don't snore. Some of them say you can snore as long as it's not deep. Some of them say if you wake up straight away when someone calls you, then this is a light sleep, and if you don't wake up when someone calls you, then this is a deep sleep. But the summary of it all is that we act upon both of them. We act upon the hadith of Safwan, and we say that the meaning of the sleep here is deep sleep, and the meaning of the sleep in the hadith of Anas is light sleep, where you're still kind of aware what is going on. Maybe not completely aware, but you are in a light sleep. And some of the scholars said the key thing here is whether or not it is likely that you will break your wudu without knowing. If it is likely you will break your wudu without knowing, then this is the sleep that you should go and make wudu from. And if it is unlikely, for example, it's much less likely you'll break your wudu sitting down than it is lying down. It's much less likely you'll break your wudu if you're kind of aware of what's going on and you're just dozing. It's much less likely you'll break your wudu if when someone calls your name, you open your eyes straight away. So they said that this is the differentiation. There are lots of different criteria within that, but this is the basic kind of distinction they made. They said that if your sleep is heavy, so that if somebody tapped you, you wouldn't wake up, and if somebody called your name, you wouldn't open your eyes, you're completely asleep, and you wake up and you don't know where you were, you don't know how long you slept for, you have no recognition of time, then in this case, you broke your wudu and you have to go and make your wudu again. And they said that as for those companions who stood up, they had a light sleep, and they were generally, the evidence for that is that when the prayer would be called, they would wake up. The iqamah would be called and they would open their eyes and go straight into the prayer. So they were not in a deep sleep. And Allahu Tabaraka wa Ta'ala A'lam, this for me seems to be the strongest opinion. And that's for two reasons. First of all, it involves acting upon all of the ahadith without rejecting any of them. And second of all, there is no doubt that from the point of view of the wudu and the rules of the wudu, there is no doubt that a person in a very light sleep is very unlikely to break their wudu, in a very, very light sleep where they're kind of aware of what's going on, and maybe they're sitting and they're just kind of, closing their eyes and they're kind of half awake, or they're sleeping very, very lightly, but just make a noise and they open their eyes. That person is generally very unlikely to break their wudu. As for the one who is in a very deep sleep and doesn't know where they are, has no knowledge of how much time has passed, and no longer knows where they are, then this person is much more likely to have broken their wudu regarding and then you add to that within the statement that the eye is like the mouth of the container, like the lid of the container. So when the eye goes to sleep, you don't know, it loosens your control over your bodily functions. And the more you sleep and the more you kind of relax, the more likely it is that you will break your wudu during that time. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. This seems to me to be the stronger opinion of the two. I definitely think the case that it breaks in all cases is a weak opinion. Really, you can't imagine that the Prophet ﷺ would allow the companions to pray without wudu and then not tell them about it. But also, you don't imagine also this concept that it doesn't break wudu in any case doesn't match the other hadith. Not just the hadith of one, the hadith of the eye being the eye being the lid of the vessel, the hadith regarding when you wake up from you wash your hands when you wake up because none of you know where your hand has been, and all of these ahadith really do indicate that when you've gone to sleep in a deep sleep, you wake up and you make wudu. And so to be honest, you can't really see a way of joining between the evidence other than the third opinion to say that when the sleep is light, then the sleep is it's allowed for you to wake up and to pray, and if the sleep is heavy, then it's not allowed. And this is narrated in Isha, and it's also narrated in Salat al-Fajr as well, that some of the companions, those who prayed Tahajjud at night, they would snooze in the saf when waiting between the adhan of Fajr and the iqamah of Fajr, that they would have a snooze at this time, and then they would get up and they would pray again without making wudu. So I think when we gather all of the narrations together, it seems to me that the stronger opinion is this third opinion, that we differentiate between the type of sleep. And again, if you wanted me to give you a criteria, I would say the further it is the chance away that you broke your wudu, the more likely it is that you can stand up and pray. Like if you are saying, well, I don't really know how much time has passed, I don't know where I was, I didn't hear any sound of anyone waking me up, I was in a really deep sleep, then I think that this is the time you get up and you make wudu. And even though some of the scholars didn't say that, but I think that's a fair opinion. And then I think that if you talk about somebody who just kind of is dozing off, and maybe snoring a little bit, but you tap them and they're like, yeah, like sometimes that happens. You're just lightly snoring when you first go to sleep, and somebody taps you and you wake up instantly. then especially if you are sitting up, it's very unlikely you're going to break your wudu at this time, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. I'm not going to get into too many of the differences in the finer points about whether you have to sit or lie or anything like that. There are lots of narrations from the companions about them lying down as well as sitting up, and there are narrations regarding snoring and other things as well. And Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. I think that we don't have time for the next hadith, the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, because this hadith has a huge amount of things to explain, as does the hadith of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu arda. So what we will do is we will stop there, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and once again we will resume inshallah ta'ala next week.